Welcome to Farm Connections with your host, Dan Hoffman.
In addition to the daily work of producing a crop and raising livestock, farmers in southern Minnesota and northern Iowa keep their eyes on some important public policy issues that impact their business and their livelihood. Today we've assembled a couple of guests who are following these issues on a daily basis. They are going to help us better understand issues surrounding conservation, labeling, big data, and more. Janet Kubat Willette is a senior staff writer for the Agri-News, and Dick Hagen is a staff writer for The Land. Welcome to you both. Janet, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Dick, welcome to Farm Connections.
Thank you, sir.
Well, certainly you have an important job telling about what's happening in agriculture. Tell us what you do at the Agri-News, Janet.
Well, at the Agri-News, I've been there for 18 years come November. My job has certainly changed over the years with the introduction of the internet. I am the person who puts the content on the website. I am the person, we're working on a newsletter, an e-newsletter, do that. But the big bread and depth of my job is reporting. Out in the field, talking to farmers, egg businesses, rural folks about what's going on, and taking photos, and then turning that into stories that you see every week in Agri-News.
That's a lot of work, and it's important. We'll come back to you, Janet. Dick, at The Land, what do you do there?
In simple terms, I'm talking agriculture, but obviously much more than that. Agriculture is such a diverse and tremendously expanded industry anymore. I'm reporting on virtually anything and everything that comes to mind, and oftentimes the ideas come from farmers themselves. But really, I'm just kind of trying to keep up with the exciting world of agriculture.
It moves fast, and I believe both of you and both of your publications help farmers keep up with it and keep current. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Well, Janet, you talked a little bit about reporting. How do you do that in an objective way? We're going to talk about some very hot topics today. How do you present an objective, straightforward article to the farmers and to the people that read your magazine?
Well, it starts by the gathering process, the news gathering process. I try to contact a diverse variety of people to gather information, and then I take that, and it's a lot like making a hot dish. You put a little of this, a little of that, and you put it together to make a story, but also to be representative to those diverse voices so that I may have an opinion, but you don't know what that opinion is.
Dick, do you do it similar?
I like making the hot dish idea. I hadn't heard that before. No, it tends to be pretty much the same. You just simply got to stay tuned in the minds of an awful lot of people, both young and old, both farm and non-farm, because they all so totally impact agriculture in different ways, but yet the whole story is to get their opinions and hopefully not share too many of mine.
Well, one topic that comes to mind that's really generated a lot of, I would say, excitement and concern is WATUS, or the Waters of the United States. Mm-hmm. What have you heard from farmers and government agencies about that?
Very little actual support from that farm audience per se, trying hard to understand that there is a place for it, but they have a hard time buying into more regulations because that, by its very nature, it denotes regulations, and you and I and Jeanette know regulations are not the favorite topic of any farmer any day. Eventually there will be some settling and some agreement, but there will be a lot of diversity because there has to be, simply because of the diverse nature of waters itself.
And I know isn't there something coming up? And of course I have to have notes because I don't go anywhere without them. But I believe on the 28th is when it takes effect, 28th of August, and I know there's some attorney generals already considering filing a suit to block the implementation of WOTUS. And I know in Minnesota, the Farm Bureau has been leading an effort to ditch the rule at one point, and they are concerned about the overreach of the APA with this. And Minnesota Farmers Union has differed from the National Farmers Union as well, saying we need to go slow on this. So it's generated a lot of interest. I know at Farm Fest last year, it was a very well-attended presentation on waters of the U.S.
Well, thank you, Janet. And Dick, when you think about what's the crux of the problem, it seems like managing water and keeping it clean is a good goal. So what seems to be the concern from the public that you're hearing?
I would say very simply, just simply regulations. How can you tell me how to manage my farm when I've been doing it a few years or many years? Water quality is part of my stewardship as being a good farmer. So why do I need to now be concerned about a set of rules that will probably be implemented by people who are going to come out and look at my property. It's just another intrusion, I think, that a lot of farmers say, just give us a chance to take care of it ourselves. Now, a lot of people who aren't farmers would say, well, you're not doing a good job at taking care of it yourself. Therefore, and that's where the arguments and the discussion will, I think, will continue for some time. There'll be lots of agreements. There'll be lots of disagreements. Some farmers are say, this doesn't mean anything to me. I've been doing it all my life. Other farmers will say, now you're just stepping one step too far into my own property. So it remains to be seen. In a sense, it's good that the discussion is happening. The solution is what is concerned and important to all of us.
Thank you, Dick. How about GMO labeling? Does that get people talking or concerns? Janet?
Yeah, I was at AgriGrowth meeting, I think it was last fall, and it was very interesting listening to that debate where they were talking. There was a person saying, consumers want this, and studies have said 90% of consumers do. There's someone from the grocery industry who said, this is going to cost us a lot of money. And I think it's Vermont and Connecticut, and there's another state who's passed laws saying, we want to label everything. And there's been a push to do it nationwide, but it gets to that debate of, is the consumer right, or can this even practically be done?
Dick?
Obviously, the implications go far, and they involve production, agriculture, they involve manufacturing and processing, they involve marketing, and obviously they involve people who are buying the product. And I think in a rightful sense, the consumer is driving this idea more than anybody, and to some extent that's where the drive should come from, because you and I are buying the product, we're spending our money, so why can't we be a little bit more particular about what we actually have a chance to buy? I think you're going to see certain stores that will just simply start catering to it more than other stores will. And it'll be, to the consumer, you just simply have to say, well, find that store that gives you what you want in GMO. Don't necessarily try to incorporate everybody that's selling food all of a sudden into this very grandiose, very wonderful idea, but all sorts of, as you said, Janet, all sorts of additional costs too. And maybe once in a while, do they really know what it means in terms of how beneficial it is to their own health? Or are they caught up in some sort of a fad, if I can use that term, that just simply carries a lot of momentum, therefore everybody's talking about it, I should be too, let's go that way.
I think you're going to start seeing it more at your Whole Foods stores, your GMO or your organic sections of the grocery stores. I think you're going to start seeing just some voluntary labeling take place there to reach that market who is calling for it, or to give them an option.
Is food safety at the heart of the discussion? Is that what's really driving this?
I would say no. I think we've been very, very satisfied with food safety over many, many years. Our consumers know that the American farmer produces quality. Our consumer knows that the processor has to produce quality, otherwise it just doesn't work in the marketplace. I think food safety is one of those umbrella things that somebody suggests and it becomes a boogaboo out there, but you have a hard time defining what it actually is.
I think there is some distrust of big ag and big business, and so I think there is some fear. I mean, our food is safe. We have a very safe food supply, but I think with the internet you can find whatever you want, so I think there is some concern from consumers about food safety.
I think I've been around a long time, and that doesn't necessarily make me any more of an authority, but I just think in the process of time you just can't move real strong, real aggressively on items like this. There'll be too much backlash, and suddenly perhaps the wrong things start happening in the marketing place too. It has to work every step of the process, not just for the consumers buying for it, but the guys who are putting it in the cans and the packages. Now, what does this mean to us? How much do we have to put in the label now that we never did before? And how are we going to segregate whether or not this is GMO or non-GMO? Sometimes, even coming out of the farm, you have a hard time discriminating, was this field GMO? Yes, it was, because. But there's confusion, and when it gets into the marketplace, sometimes the elevators have a hard time keeping these products separate in their own storage systems too, because it's a small fraction of the total quantity that they move into the market. So it's just another bump in the road.
Great discussion, and we probably get influence from many places. I just returned from Ireland. They have a discussion about all these topics as well, and I believe some of that comes to our country from there, from Europe and the European Union. Janet, the governor announced an initiative at a summit in Marshall, Minnesota last summer, I think it was. December, thank you, about buffer strips. And what happened after that announcement?
And there was an uproar in farm country. I spent many a day at a meeting talking about buffer strips, and the 50-foot buffer proposal was just decried as a one-size-fits-all measure when there were already laws on the books, the shoreland ordinance and the ditch law, that were already in place to govern, and there were 6 counties across the state of Minnesota who had taken the initiatives to put that in place. The problem was there was no consistency across the state.
Why do farmers care about how wide that buffer strip is? How does that impact their business?
Well, it's cost. First, you're not being paid in most cases unless you enroll in a conservation program, or you get paid from the ditch authority. But you're paying on that land. It's not free land. You're still paying for it, and you can plant it to perennial vegetation. But if you don't have a ruminant animal that's eating alfalfa or grass, then you've got no use for that. So it's a cost where there's no economic benefit to you.
And farmers are common sense people that like to receive value, but they're also paying principal, interest, taxes, and insurance on that property, and maybe some management costs. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Dick, what did you hear? So the buffer strip thing all of a sudden surfaced. What happened in your camp?
Janet's word uproar says it all. It just simply was unbeknown to anybody, including the governor's staff and some of the people within the Department of Agriculture. And where it exactly came from, I don't think I've ever heard that exact idea, except maybe once in a while our governor does have a unique idea that he likes to spring, but obviously he had some thought about it, but who knows where it came from. It's going to be an issue that will continue to ferment. A lot of farmers are aware of the 61.5 foot because they're simply part of conservation farming. And so a lot of conservation districts in the right areas, they're pretty good about reminding farmers that they have an obligation. But we also know that there's an awful lot of ditches. Our county is famous for, we got about 1,200 some miles of drainage ditches, that sometimes that corn crop is within 4 foot from the edge of that top strip on that buffer, on the ditch. So there's concerns, rightly so. How will it settle out? There has to be some flexibility that certain lands in certain areas have to be this wide because of the nature of the land, because of the terrain, because of the stream itself. And in other areas where you have a tightly designed drainage area, then I think you can get by with a lesser width. Is that going to be the 61.5 foot? In most cases, I think it will be. But sometimes it will be less just simply because it has to be less. There's just not enough room to get that additional buffer. The final answer, it'll be multiple answers. There just won't be a one size fits all as we all started with. But I give farmers a lot of credit. They just simply have been overly criticized for this since day one. They are, for the most part, very concerned about soil runoff. You can see that in how they tile their land anymore, in terms of how they rotate crops, in terms of how they are cutting down on tillage to just minimize the effects of what a 3 or 4 inch rain suddenly does. Well, the 3 and 4 inch rain suddenly does a lot of things that you can't do regardless of how good your stewardship efforts are. Lots yet to learn, but it's the right idea, it's the right story. The rules and regulations and definitions remain to be seen.
The next issue will be July of next year when the maps come out that say where you have to have a 16.5 foot, where you have to have a 50-foot buffer, and that's when farmers need to weigh in and say, this is not a creek, this is a ditch, or they need to get involved at that point and be watching for those next July. I believe those maps are due. And then the buffers are supposed to be in place by November 2017. I believe it's on November 2017 is either ditches or the public waters, and then the other one is November 2018. So it's coming up, but legislation can change.
Well, and thank you both for helping that process of vetting and sharing information. Thinking about that, how have you been involved with COOL, or country of origin labeling? Have you done some things with that, Janet?
Very, very little on that. Just followed that a little as far as how it's playing out in Minnesota and how the groups are involved. And I think there's a bill out there now in Congress talking about making it voluntary instead of mandatory. I know Farmers Union has been fighting this for years to make it mandatory, but now I think Canada and Mexico have said, no, it's not. We don't want you to label because it's a disadvantage to our product.
Interesting.
Well, it apparently is, in fact, in violation of our treaty agreements with both our neighbors on the north and on the south. And even some of our farm leaders are acknowledging that we cannot quite implement this simply because it's a lot unfair advantage, and it's particularly to the Canadian guys who are moving a lot of product into our country. And all of a sudden, country of origin labeling on beef that comes in from Canada? No, not exactly. It just can't be a one size fits all almost when you talk about buffer strips. It'll continue to ferment for a long time. Again, it's consumer driven, and that's probably where it should be. But to think that it will fit across the board on any and all products, and what does it do to the just simply to the labeling of the product in the retail store? How do you distinguish? Do you have on the meat counter, this meats over here are strictly country of origin labeled, and over here it's who knows where it's from? Well, it's going to be confusing. I think it plays back to consumers need to start going to that grocery store that labels and gives them what they want. And it doesn't mean that every grocery store selling meat has to have country of origin labeling.
Have you seen the labeling at grocery stores?
No, I haven't. Not
Okay.
yet.
I've seen it at one. It just says this product was grown, this product comes from cattle that were grown, processed, and raised in the United States. I've seen it at one
Okay.
grocery store.
Interesting. How about big data? It sounds like a very dangerous kind of thing. Big data, big government. What's the concern about data?
Well, there's so much information gathered now when you plant, when you harvest. Who owns that? Is that yours or is it John Deere's? Mm-hmm. And even when you go online and you're plugging in your address, you're plugging in your phone number, who owns that? I mean, it's scary. We got a call just the other day from somebody who claimed our computer wasn't working.
Oh.
Well, do they actually know that? And so it's not something you can see. So I think it's scary because you can't see it and you don't know. There's no policies out there governing who has this data, who owns it.
How it will be used.
And how it will be used.
Dick, what have you heard?
Well, I think the impact of big data, you really got to identify that farm audience out there. The technology-oriented young men or older guys, they kind of love it because it's how they drive their farming business anymore. And they are, in fact, I wouldn't say drowning in big data because there's so much available, but it definitely has become part of how they make management decisions. The advent of the drones, all of a sudden this little camera is providing that much more information than they've ever known before, but the challenge seems to be how can we download all this information and apply it to how I'm planting my corn, how I'm fertilizing, how I'm harvesting, all those things. And yet they kind of like it. They want the opportunity of working with it to show me a more convenient way of making it logical and easy for me to implement on my particular farm equipment.
Dick, do you have a website if people want to find out more or follow you?
Well, just simply go thelandonline.com, and that's anything and everything that all of us write ends up available on the line or on that website.
Nice. Janet, same question.
Agrinews.com.
Good way to follow your work and also the Agri-News and the Land magazine. Thank you, Janet, for joining us. Thank you, Dick.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today. I hope you've gained a new understanding about some important issues being discussed in our rural communities today. I'm your host, Dan Hoffman. See you next time on Farm Connections.